Welcome to Miami Lead, a podcast dedicated to equipping leaders to face today's challenges with courage, faith, and innovation. This series is designed for anyone wanting to grow as a leader. Each episode offers insights, strategies, and inspiration from some of Miami's most influential minds. Our goal is to help you lead with purpose, build meaningful connections, and have a lasting impact on your community. We're glad you're here, because everybody wins when a leader gets better. And now, Pastor Bill White.
Well, let me speak to those that are joining us on the podcast today. It is April of 2025, and I want to welcome you to Miami Lead, especially if this is your first time joining us. Then we are honored by your presence, and we believe you're going to be inspired by our content today. Our desire in Miami Lead is to provide a leader sharpening experience where leaders of all kinds can access quality content that is actionable and relevant to topics where we live our lives today, and then take your leadership to the next level. This is our desire. And this is also a studio gathering, lunch and learn for those here live and in person. And so we also hope that this will be an opportunity to connect and to network with other leaders that are looking to raise the bar of benefit for others, which is what our desire as leaders is to do. And that's why our tagline here is that we believe everybody wins when a leader gets better. And today, I'm very excited to have joining us a philanthropist, multi-Emmy award-winning journalist who knows the power of story. And June, I've been reading about you, perhaps others have too, in the latest issue of Coral Gables magazine, the Centennial edition, where your skills are being, not just your background in journalism, your education, but being brought into your research and writing skills into a very special personal play that we want to talk about in just a moment. But I'd like to start a little bit with your story. And as we do, would you join me in welcoming June Thomson Morris to our Miami Lead?
Thank you.
The Centennial Edition also lists your name among some other very significant names like Fisher and Merrick and Flagler. And in South Florida, if you're tuning in from somewhere else than that, those names are associated with words like leadership and legacy. And so today we're going to be exploring some influence and impact that lasts in terms of legacy, but especially through the power of story, which is where our guest today has invested her life and now brings those skills to bear, like I said, on a very personal project. So why don't we start with your story? You grew up in Coral Gables.
I did. I was introduced as a native. And I'm thinking I can't be the only native here. My husband, in fact, was born at Doctors Hospital, and so was I. Anyone else born at Doctors Hospital? See, I thought so.
And Gables alum. You're
and Gables, Coral Gables
Go
High
Cavs.
School alumni,
Yeah.
alumnus. And born and raised in Coral Gables. And then I went away for a good 30 years when I was embarking on my career. That took me out west. Further west, and every job I got took me further west. I thought I was going to end up in
Television
Hawaii,
journalism.
but I went to Los Angeles in television journalism, yes. KNBC in Los Angeles, KGO in San Francisco.
And you were telling me that there was a time when your mother, who had been serving in local government, had a campaign that she thought you might be able to assist her in, so you came back here to help.
Yes, that brought me back. That's right. After all those years, she was thinking about running for office again. She is the first and only female mayor of Coral Gables in its first 100 years.
And she's here today.
She's here
Can
today.
we honor Mayor Dorothy Thompson? Thank you for joining us so much. Thank you for calling her back.
She thought I was going to run her campaign, but I came home and realized what I needed to do was talk her out of running. I said, Mom, you served 16 years and you're the grand dame of Coral Gables. You have done so much, and she continues to do so much for the city. You don't need to go through that again, another campaign. As we know, those can be pretty rough. We're going through a pretty rough campaign season right now.
Yeah. Well, speaking of right now in the season we're in, I don't know if those tuning in on the podcast will be aware of this, but those of us locally know that the city beautiful of Coral Gables is celebrating our 100th anniversary year.
Yes.
And that's what brings us also to a very special experience that's coming up. You've been working on a project for several years. You wanted to write a book about Coral Gables. Bring us into that a little bit.
Actually, it started with a story my grandmother told me as a child. And I was always fascinated by this story. My father's family comes from Indiana, and a lot of the early pioneers down here came from the Midwest, places like Indiana and Ohio, or up north, like in the Northeast, New York and New Jersey. So her family was in Indianapolis at that time. My grandfather was already down here in Miami closing land deals. He was a third attorney to set up shop on Miami Beach. And they knew the Fisher family, the Carl Fisher family. He was also from Greensburg, Indiana originally. So he was very inspired by the stories of this brand new place called Miami. Well, he went home and he went to a dance and he met this young woman, Lucy Mae Barnes, and they corresponded for about a year. And then he sent her a train ticket. And this young lady, she was 19 at the time. He met her when she was 18. She had never traveled in her life, and suddenly she's going to get on a train all by herself, unescorted in 1924, which is pretty scandalous. And in order to do that, she had to convince her mother that it was a marriage proposal. And, all those letters, back then the letters, people wrote beautiful letters back then. I'm sure she had quite a few beautiful letters, and so she was able to convince her mother that was it. But her mother said, if you get down there, he does not marry you right away, you get back on the next train. And she promised she would do that. Her reputation would be ruined. So this young lady came down. It wasn't a straight shot getting from Indiana over to the Florida East Coast Railroad that Henry Flagler built. She got there, she came down, and luckily for me, my grandfather was an honorable man, and he married her, and thankfully for my mother, since she married their son. And so I love that story, and I thought, well, gosh, that story alone, I want to write about it someday. But then during the pandemic, when the whole world shut down, I finally had that opportunity to sit down and write something. Well, I had to research. I had to first of all find out if the story was true, and it was true. And then I started learning about the history of Miami. I thought, this is a much bigger story. It's not just about my grandparents. These visionaries back then. And as you say, I love the topic today to talk about the legacy that they created. And there's that story is so complicated and wild in many ways, because these men like Carl Fisher and George Merrick, when they passed away, they had no idea that they were leaving a legacy. They thought they had been forgotten. And in fact, they had been forgotten at that time. It wasn't until later that their reputations were rehabilitated and people realized the great legacy that they left. And it's a remarkable thing that we go about our lives and we're doing things and we don't really know what kind of legacy we're leaving, whether it's with our own family and our children, the things that we say to our children that's going to impact their lives later on, or the things that we build and create that will leave a legacy for the community. And I think a lot of people die not knowing about that legacy. And so, it's something interesting for me to think about. We shouldn't care. We should do the right thing and do wonderful things and always try to improve the lives of our family and our community, and not knowing what the impact will be and not doing it for the impact.
You can see why I'm excited that we would have this moment together today. Actually, this is like a blast from the past episode. And to get there, I would like for us to, let's bring up some of those legacy leaders, some photographs, and you can tell us a little bit about each one as we do. Can we do that? I think you sent some ahead. This is
Carl Fisher, Mr. Miami Beach. So is everyone familiar with Carl Fisher's name? All
Fisher
right.
Island.
Fisher Island. Well, that was named Fisher Island after he passed away. He has no idea that there's an island named after him. At the time that he died, he was penniless, and he was an alcoholic. And he was renting an apartment, a small apartment on Miami Beach from a friend, and even had a roommate to help pay expenses. Okay, and he died at the age of 65. And this man.
Oh, go ahead. You have
No. If I can tell a little bit about him, because it's an extraordinary story. Because first of all, his father was a pastor. No. The other two were pastors. Anyway, he grew up in a family with not much money, and he was half blind. He had extreme astigmatism that was not that was not diagnosed until he was 31. When he was in the 7th grade, he's 12 years old. He simply walked out of the classroom and never returned because he couldn't see the chalkboard. And the other kids called him the stupidest kid in school. And so he went into the business of selling bicycles. And after that, he became just so enamored with cars and speed. He owned the very first car anyone in Indianapolis. He is the one who established the Indianapolis Speedway.
Really?
The Indy
Amazing. 500
is Carl Fisher's. Okay, yes. And they even have Carl Fisher Day up there in Indianapolis to celebrate all that he did. There were no good roads. People were not going on vacations on roads. And so he built roads. He actually did a writing campaign and raised $10 million to create the first ocean-to-ocean highway. It went from Times Square all the way down to San Diego. And he also created the Dixie Highway. He built that Dixie Highway with his own money. I can go on. I know I want to make this short.
Let's bring up the next one. Let's see. We're going to get more. Who's this?
This is George Merrick. Does everyone know who George Merrick is?
Mr. Coral Gables.
Mr.
Right?
Coral Gables, that's right. So he's this young guy who came down with his family, his father first. He and his father, Solomon Merrick, who was a pastor, came down at age 13, and they bought this land sight unseen that was far from the water, very cheap land out here. Nobody, basically no one was out here, just mangroves and very hard coral rock. And George worked from the time he was 13 years old, and they created this family plantation with lots of guava and tomatoes and things like that. And George took over as an adult, and it was a very highly established and profitable farm. And he could have lived the rest of his life as a very wealthy farmer. But no, he was very bewitched by the whole City Beautiful movement that was sweeping Europe and America. We did not come up with that moniker here in Coral Gables. It's not unique to us. It was the City Beautiful movement, and the idea was that if you created a place with great beauty, that everyone would get along. It was a utopian ideal. And so he decided to turn his farm into Coral Gables, the city that we know and love and cherish today. But once again, by the time he passed away at 56, he had been forgotten by the city of Coral Gables. In fact, they had after the Great Florida land boom went bust, and then he had the stock market crash of 1929, a hurricane in 1926, the Great Depression. He was kicked off the city commission. And he was taken to court by the city, accused of mishandling funds, and he became an alcoholic, and he disappeared into his depression. But he did get sober, and he came back and he became postmaster, which is a respectable job. It doesn't pay very much. He went from being one of the wealthiest men in America to being the postmaster in Miami. But his health issues and his alcoholism caught up with him, and he died at a very young age.
It's an incredible story. And before we bring the next photograph up, I want to say, as pastor, honor the son of a pastor, Arva Moore Parks, who is the esteemed historian here for South Florida.
Yes.
She told me, did I know that the University Baptist Church land was given to it by George Merrick, that there might be a church? And then I discovered in her book, Son of the South Winds, that his belief was that right next to schools, in terms of the most important institutions in a city, are churches. And then I found out that Mr. Merrick had given land for the Catholic Church, for Episcopalian Church, for our Baptist Church, for the Universalist, I think, church, and because he believed that his City Beautiful needed the religious liberty, the quality of character development, and so we're here today.
Yeah.
In fact, I also discovered that on 5 different occasions during those same hardships at the beginning of this church's history, George Merrick gave us the original land. Then when then he helped to build the original tabernacle that this Baptist church met in. The hurricane blew it away. that first summer, they had reached 200 people in that tabernacle, but the hurricane blew it away. So then he said, well, I've got a spot on Ponce de Leon, which the church then met in. And then he gave another piece of land, University of Miami, that we might be able to build our future. And so I just want to say that his legacy is more than something that shows up in a magazine. I don't know that any of what I just shared with you is in this magazine, but I can tell you it's in Arvamore Park's book about Coral Gables and his desire to see religious freedom, religious liberty, religious values practiced in the city beautiful. So that ends my part of the commercial. But speaking of commercial.
He provided us more than just fountains and coral rock walls, right?
Yeah.
He also provided this wonderful opportunity for people of various faiths to come together and live in this wonderful place, and he knew the importance of education. He put together all the right elements for his perfect city, which is what he wanted to create, a perfect city.
Next photograph is Flagler, I believe.
Yes.
And I just want to make a passing mention here because I want to talk about that city that your play speaks to. So Flagler makes your story because that's the train that...
Yes. He's earlier.
Okay.
He's earlier in time. Carl Fisher and George Merrick were contemporaries. Carl Fisher was just finishing up Miami Beach when George Merrick was going full bore on Coral Gables. But Henry Flagler passed away, I think, in 1913. So if you can imagine, in 1890 was the first time he came down this way. And it wasn't called Miami, it was called Fort Dallas. And there were 500 people living there.
Wow.
And so actually then by 1910, there were 10,000 people, and the city was now incorporated, and they wanted to name it Flagler after him because the reason there were 10,000 people up from 500 people is because he brought his railroad down.
Employed.
But he said, and Flagler, Florida actually doesn't sound that bad, does it? Flagler, Florida. But he said, no, I want a sexier name. He didn't say that quite, but he wanted a more marketable name. And he said, I don't want that. So they came up with Miami, which some people say means sweet water. Some people say means the mouth of the river or something, but it's an Indian name. It sounds a lot cooler than Flagler. But he did allow them to name Flagler Street after him.
All right.
So, and actually, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
So this could have been Flagler, Florida, and actually Solomon Merrick, George Merrick's father, wanted to name the city Guavonia because they grew a lot of guava. And actually, Althea Merrick's, that's George Merrick's mother, Althea, she actually started the very first school in Coral Gables, and before it was Coral Gables, and the name of it was Guavonia. So the father said, let's just carry it over. So we could have been, Mom, you could have been the only female mayor elected in Guavonia's first 100 years. And you know where Guavonia is? It's 10 minutes south of Flagler, Florida. I mean, isn't that crazy to think about?
The Bible says, in everything give thanks. I'm wanting to give thanks. That isn't our name. How about you? But let's move up to the next, because greetings, it's greetings from paradise.
Greetings from paradise.
Right? Tell us about this.
Well, as you know, so the
Opening night, April 29th.
Yes.
And this is the marquee event of the Chamber of Commerce for the celebration of the 100th birthday of...
Isn't that amazing? I'm so proud to be a part of that. Thank you. And the reason it's called Greetings from Paradise is because I just imagine that my grandfather must have sent her some of those beautiful, colorfully illustrated postcards back then. And many of them, even today, will say, Greetings from Paradise or Greetings from Miami. So that's why it's named that. So August 29th is the opening night, and that's the actual day in 1925 that the city of Coral Gables was incorporated. So it's a very big deal. And you probably know the name Mark Trowbridge, who recently passed away, president of the Chamber of Commerce. He read my play and loved it so much that he wrapped the Coral Gables Chamber's centennial celebration around it as well. So opening night is the big the Chamber's having a gala that night. So we've got the VIP cocktail party, and then the show, the program, and then dinner outside right next to Miracle Mile. And then the rest of the nights it runs through. It's 8 o'clock at night. The program on Wednesday through Saturday is a matinee. So it's April 29th through May 3rd. And I have postcards with me today. I think, did you pass them around already? Okay, my husband's going to pass them around. And I'll tell you how you can get tickets, because if you've ever thought, is interest in the history of the city, this is a fun way to learn it. I've always learned history through the stories of people. That's how I'm a storyteller. I love biographies and autobiographies, and this is a way to learn the history of Coral Gables in Miami and South Florida through the stories of those who were the visionaries who created this place we live now.
Well, I'd like to make a turn
Okay.
to some direct leader applications, because I know in your research and writing that I've read that you sent me, that you saw some parallels from the early days of those that didn't know they were going to be legacy leaders but were, and current scenarios where we find ourselves. Somebody said, history repeats itself because we don't learn from our past. I came across another quote that simply said, history may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I had a sense of you picking up some of the rhymes from the 20s and then where we are today, the 2020s, and that maybe some leadership lessons that you could bring us into that you saw then that maybe would be appropriate now, and then we'll move from that into some of your personal. Can we do that?
Well, there's also the saying, there's nothing new under the sun, right? And certainly I find that to be true. While everything's different, it's the same as well, especially when you're talking about human beings, whether they come from Indiana, Ohio, New York, or they come from Cuba, they come from Argentina and Venezuela. We're all people, and we share that identity together. Miami now is this beautiful tapestry of all these different nationalities, and that's what makes Miami so very, very special. But we're also a city almost entirely of newcomers, and those first newcomers weren't from Latin America. They were immigrants from other parts of our own country. But Miami, one of the continuums is Miami has been a continuous wave of newcomers, usually in huge waves. That initial wave, the Great Florida Land Boom of 1925, 2.5 million people moved into the state that year. So you can think about 1810, when there were 500 people down here, 1910, 10,000 people, and then we had millions of people down here just a few years later, and they couldn't keep up with all that building. In 1924, the state legislature got rid of income and inheritance taxes. And at that time, the governor on down, all the politicians were bankers, and they were all in on this. This was the final frontier of America, and people seriously were making a lot of money, and they wanted to lure the rich down here. So 1925, by changing the tax laws, that brought on the Great Florida Land Boom of 1925. 100 years later, what are you hearing about? But people from New York, New Jersey, California moving here because of the tax advantages. So that shows you, on the one hand, what the leaders of our communities and of our state can do to help with the economically with the growth of our states and our cities. So that's one thing. Another thing is, we think today that what we're going through is just this terrific wave of new things that we're all scared about. AI. We're scared about where this technology is going to take us. We're scared about all these changing moral values and the gender identity things that we're all having to grapple with. And we think that we're the first generation to have to deal with all this. But if you think back then, they were coming out of the Industrial Revolution. Automobiles came about. People were very scared of these noisy machines. And people seriously were dying all over the place because they didn't know how to drive these machines yet, and they weren't perfected. They're running into trees and things like that, or running off the road. Airplanes, it was the age of invention back then. And then, we were coming out of the Victorian era, too, of those morals and values. Well, after World War I was a bloody war. Millions of men died, right? And so people were just tired of being depressed, and they wanted a better way of life. And we came into the age of consumerism, too, as money started flowing back into people's pockets. And the icebox came out, and even the toaster oven. It was a very, very exciting time. But people couldn't keep up. And when we got into the 20s, the reason for the Roaring 20s is because people want to just get rid of those Victorian ideals and kick up their heels and have a great time, dance to Charleston. We all love seeing that. But in reality, women got their right to vote in 1920. And they were very eager to explore all their new freedoms. And they cut their hair short, and the hemlines came up, and they started wearing Clairvaux red lipstick and smoking in public. And these were scandalous times. And a 19-year-old comes down on a train to meet a man she met at a dance. It was they were dealing with a lot of change back then too, just like us today. We always think that when it comes to evolution, everything has led to this point in time, when in reality, we're just a single point on a continuum.
Well, could I, I'm amazed that our time has already flown by, and I've got to bring us to a landing.
No, let's keep talking.
But I would love, this is fascinating to me, but I would love for you to just, if you can lift one leadership lesson that you have brought and out of your experience, your observation, into the way that you live now and where you find hope for the future. There were a lot of dreams back then that were pulling people forward.
Yeah.
Do you find reason for hope? And then how do you lead forward in your life?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I sat down to write this, I wasn't thinking about legacy or anything. I was just thinking about writing down my grandmother's story. And I didn't know where it would lead. I certainly didn't know at that time that it would lead to being the marquee event for the city's centennial celebration and for the Chamber of Commerce. And but I had a passion for this story. And the more I learn about South Florida and how little has been written about it, it fuels my passion. And but I don't think about, well, what kind of legacy is this going to lead or leave in my? I just think I'm filled with passion. And when you're filled with something like that, a fire, a desire to do something, I think you should just follow it and not worry about what the legacy will be. And I am certain that Carl Fisher was not thinking, gosh, I want to lose my entire fortune so that people 100 years from now will think I'm a great guy. He did it because he had an idea in his head. He was a visionary, and he moved forward with that idea, come what may. And the same with Henry Flagler was with John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil, one of the richest men in America. And he could have just spent the rest of his life just being rich and enjoying his mansions and all that sort of thing. But he had an idea about a railroad, of opening up new land. And he spent much of his fortune doing that. So I think just follow your passion. Don't be foolish, But I believe God calls us all in his own way, that small, still voice within each one of us, and gets us excited about ideas, and we should follow that as long as they're good ideas and they're for the betterment of society.
Well, as a pastor, one of the things I always do is invite every guest to let us know if there's anything in your spiritual journey, how your faith has made a difference for you. And I know that you're a person of faith. I know that you have an active spiritual life. Anything you'd like to share with us there so that our listeners can take it forward and maybe find application themselves?
I just completed something called Storyworth, which I don't know if you guys know about it. It's online. You can write your own life story. My mother gave it to me as a gift last Christmas. And as I started talking about my life, I started writing this down, not realizing I was going to write this, but it just came to be that I wrote down that I felt that I was privileged in growing up in a Christian family. I don't have one of those conversion stories. I was simply born and raised into a Christian family. And with my father's very proud of his Scots-Irish history and coming down the Protestant faith and seeding churches throughout the country, which my family did. And so I believe that when you raise a child in the church, you raise them to learn certain morals and values. You don't know where that's going to lead. And once again, we can't think about that. It can't be, well, I want to do this because I want my child to be a good Christian. Or you do it because they're not teaching this in school anymore, unless you go to a parochial school and you get that. But most schools are just not teaching morals and values. They're not teaching character. But you learn that in church. And I feel that with that and with the example set by my own parents and my grandparents, my whole family, my family's loaded down with pastors and chaplains and things like that. Long history of it.
Not that that's a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing.
Okay.
It's to me, even though I was in journalism, I'm working at the network level and TV news, and there's a lot of liberalism in that. I never found that to be a problem whatsoever, because I simply I did stories with my Christian mindset, but I was always seeking the truth. That didn't mean I was not telling part of the story. It's just like I have that outlook on life, and No, well, I believe that the Christian worldview is the best of the worldviews, and it leads us to be compassionate people, live by the fruits of the Spirit, to be kind and patient and forgiving, and not to slander people. And I've tried to live my life that way, and I don't think I've lost anything by living that way. As a matter of fact, I think that that's the best guide that you can give any child to set them on the right path.
Thank you so much. Once again, shall we say thank you to June for joining us today? Thank you so much. And thank you for joining our podcast. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Miami Lead. Colossians 3:23 says, "Do everything as for the Lord." No matter your position, God wants you to lead in a way that honors Him. If you enjoyed the conversation, remember to follow the channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss an episode. Like to be a part of our live audience for future recordings? Head over to miamilead.org to learn more and register. We'd love to see you there. Remember, everybody wins when a leader gets better.